A person walks into a room they have never visited before. Nothing unusual is happening. No one says anything strange. And yet, for a few seconds, the mind insists this exact moment has already occurred. This brief, puzzling sensation has a name almost everyone recognizes: déjà vu. What follows is not a story or a dramatization. It is a calm look at what psychology and cognitive research actually say about this experience, and what it reveals about how the human brain handles memory, attention, and awareness. Before going further, it's worth taking a moment to think about why this topic matters. Understanding déjà vu is not really about solving a mystery. It is about understanding something more useful: how ordinary, healthy brains sometimes produce unusual feelings simply because of how memory and perception are built. If this kind of calm, evidence-based look at human behavior is something worth seeing more of, subscribing is an easy way to support that. No pressure, just an open invitation. Now let's look closely at what's actually happening. Déjà vu is generally defined by psychologists as a strong, sudden feeling that a current experience has happened before, paired with the awareness that this cannot logically be true. The phrase itself comes from French and simply means already seen. It was first used in psychological writing in the late 1800s, but for a long time, the experience remained difficult to study scientifically because it could not be predicted or reliably reproduced. Survey-based research suggests that a large majority of people experience déjà vu at some point in their lives. Most estimates place this somewhere between half and two-thirds of the population. What researchers have found particularly interesting is the pattern of when it tends to occur. Déjà vu is rarely reported in early childhood. It becomes more common during the teenage years and into the 20s, and then research indicates that its frequency gradually decreases with age. This pattern matters because it points away from anything supernatural and toward something developmental. If déjà vu were caused by something mystical, there would be no reason for it to follow such a consistent age curve. Instead, psychology suggests that this pattern is closely tied to how memory systems mature and later change across the lifespan, a detail that becomes more meaningful as the explanations below unfold. One of the most studied explanations for déjà vu involves how memory actually stores information. Rather than saving an experience as one single, complete file, the brain tends to break it into separate components: shapes, sounds, lighting, spatial layout, even subtle details like the arrangement of furniture or the rhythm of a conversation. This is sometimes referred to in cognitive research as feature-based or associative memory. Because memory works this way, a brand new situation can still share a small but specific detail with something stored long ago. That single matching detail can be enough to trigger a feeling of familiarity, even though the overall situation is new. Consider a common workplace example. A person attends a meeting in an office building they have never visited. The layout of the room, the placement of the windows, and the general flow of the space are unfamiliar overall. Yet partway through the meeting, a quiet sense of familiarity settles in. Often this is not because the room itself was seen before, but because one feature of it, the angle of the light, the spacing between chairs, the tone of a colleague's voice, closely resembles a detail from an earlier, unrelated experience the person doesn't consciously recall. Psychology suggests that the brain, in this scenario, partially activates a memory based on a fragment, but fails to identify or retrieve the actual source of that fragment. The result is a kind of incomplete memory signal. A strong sense of this is familiar without any accompanying explanation. Since the brain doesn't like loose ends, it often applies that floating sense of familiarity to the entire current scene, rather than to the small detail that actually triggered it. This explains something important. Déjà vu is rarely triggered by something dramatic. It tends to surface during ordinary, low-stakes situations: a meeting, a hallway, a casual conversation, precisely because these are the moments where small sensory details can quietly echo something from the past without drawing direct attention. A second well-documented explanation focuses not on memory storage, but on attention. Human awareness is often assumed to be a single, focused spotlight, but research indicates that the brain is constantly processing far more information than a person consciously notices at any given moment. A relatable daily life example helps illustrate this. Picture someone running errands, walking through a store while reading a message on their phone. Their conscious attention is fully absorbed by the screen. Meanwhile, their eyes and ears are still passively taking in the surroundings: the layout of the aisles, the background music, the color of a nearby display. None of this is being consciously processed, but it is still being registered by the brain at some level. A short time later, the person looks up from their phone and takes in the same space directly, this time with full conscious attention. In that moment, déjà vu can appear. The store feels oddly familiar, even though logically the person knows they only just arrived. Often observed behavior in these situations suggests the brain genuinely did encounter this scene moments earlier, just not with conscious awareness switched on. When conscious attention finally catches up, it compares the scene to a memory that was quietly created seconds before and interprets the match as something older and more significant than it actually is. This pattern is especially relevant in daily modern life, where divided attention has become far more common. Phones, multitasking, and background distractions create frequent opportunities for the brain to absorb surroundings without consciously registering them, only to notice them properly a few moments later. A third explanation, often discussed in cognitive psychology, focuses on the timing between two mental processes, perceiving something in the present and recognizing whether it matches anything in memory. Under normal circumstances, these two processes happen almost simultaneously, so smoothly that a person never notices them as separate steps. Research indicates that under certain conditions, general fatigue, mental overload, or simple inconsistencies in neural processing speed, there can be an extremely brief delay between these two steps. Specifically, the signal that something is being stored as a memory may, for a split second, run slightly ahead of the signal that registers the moment as currently happening. When conscious awareness catches up just afterward, it checks the new information against memory and finds that it's already there. The natural conclusion the brain draws is that this must be something previously experienced, when in reality, it is simply experiencing a very small internal timing mismatch. A relationship-based example makes this easier to picture. Two people are having an ordinary conversation, perhaps discussing weekend plans. Nothing about the topic is unusual. Midway through a sentence, one person suddenly feels as though this exact conversation, in this exact setting with these exact words, has already taken place. There is no specific memory to point to, just a sudden, strong sense of repetition. Psychology suggests that in such moments, the brain briefly logged the start of the sentence into memory storage just slightly before conscious awareness processed it as a new, present moment event. The result is a fleeting but convincing feeling that the conversation is being replayed rather than experienced for the first time. This explanation has its limits. On its own, it does not fully account for why déjà vu tends to appear in new, unfamiliar settings rather than constantly, in random, everyday moments. This is why most researchers see these three explanations, partial memory matching, divided attention, and timing delays, not as competing theories, but as overlapping mechanisms that can combine in different situations. Returning to the age-related pattern mentioned earlier, this is where the explanations connect to something measurable. In early childhood, the brain's memory systems, particularly those responsible for organizing detailed, context-rich memories, are still developing. Without a large, well-organized library of past experiences and surroundings, there are simply fewer opportunities for new situations to accidentally overlap with old ones. This may explain why déjà vu is so rarely reported in young children. By the teenage years and into the 20s, two things are happening at once. First, a person has accumulated a much larger library of life experiences, places, and conversations, which raises the chances of overlap. Second, this age range often involves frequent new environments, new schools, new social circles, new routines, combined with a brain that is still highly active in forming and organizing memory. Psychology suggests this combination of many memories and many new situations creates ideal conditions for accidental partial matches, divided attention episodes, and timing delays to occur more often. As people move further into adulthood, life often becomes more routine. Fewer entirely new situations occur, memory processing patterns stabilize, and research indicates that déjà vu experiences generally decline in frequency, without disappearing completely. This developmental curve adds further support to the idea that déjà vu is a natural side effect of how memory and attention systems function and change over time, rather than something mysterious or externally caused. One of the more striking aspects of déjà vu, frequently described by people who experience it, is a brief but strong sense of knowing what is about to happen next. This goes beyond familiarity with a place or moment. It includes a confident feeling of anticipating a specific outcome. A workplace meeting offers a clear, relatable example. A person sits in on a discussion and suddenly experiences déjà vu about the room and the conversation. Along with that feeling, they may feel almost certain that a particular colleague is about to make a specific comment, or that the meeting is about to take an exact, predictable turn. In the moment, this certainty can feel very convincing. Controlled research using repeated virtual environments with similar spatial layouts has tested this directly by asking participants, during moments of induced déjà vu, to predict an upcoming detail, such as which direction a path would turn. The findings were consistent. People reported very high confidence in their predictions, but their actual accuracy was no better than random chance. Psychology suggests this happens because the feeling of familiarity is closely tied to the feeling of having experienced something before, and experiences from the past naturally come with a sense of already knowing the outcome. When the brain mistakenly signals this has already happened, it tends to also generate a secondary related signal, and therefore I already know what comes next. The second feeling is essentially borrowed from the first without any real predictive information behind it. This explains why déjà vu can feel oddly prophetic in the moment, despite offering no actual insight into what follows. Most people experience déjà vu only occasionally. Research indicates these episodes generally last just a few seconds and happen a handful of times a year, often during ordinary low-stress moments. This occasional, brief pattern is considered a normal part of how memory and attention work, and it is not something that requires explanation beyond the mechanisms already discussed. It is also worth noting, without drawing any conclusions about any individual, that researchers studying memory and attention have observed that a small number of people report experiencing this sensation far more frequently than average multiple times within a single day, over extended periods. In such cases, broader research has looked at whether unusually frequent and disruptive episodes might be worth discussing with a medical professional, simply because frequency and intensity outside the typical range are generally worth understanding rather than assuming. This is not a diagnosis or a claim about any specific person. It is simply an observation about how researchers approach unusual patterns of frequency, in the same way unusually frequent headaches or unusually frequent forgetfulness might prompt a conversation with a doctor. For the overwhelming majority of people, however, déjà vu remains exactly what has been described throughout this video: an occasional, harmless, and ultimately understandable result of how memory and attention briefly overlap. Stepping back from the specific mechanisms, déjà vu offers a useful window into something broader about how the mind works. People tend to assume that their conscious awareness has full, real-time access to everything happening around them and within their own memory system. Déjà vu quietly challenges that assumption. It shows that perception and memory are not single, seamless processes, but are built from multiple components working slightly independently, sometimes so closely in sync that no gap is ever noticed, and occasionally falling just out of step in ways that create strange, fleeting sensations. It also shows that confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. The strong, convincing feeling of certainty that often accompanies déjà vu, including the sense of predicting what comes next, demonstrates how a feeling can be entirely genuine and entirely unreliable at the same time. This has relevance well beyond déjà vu itself. Often observed behavior in everyday decision-making reflects a similar pattern: strong gut feelings of certainty that are not necessarily backed by accurate information. Recognizing this in a small, harmless context like déjà vu can make it easier to recognize in larger, more consequential situations. What makes déjà vu worth examining is not the mystery surrounding it, but the clarity it offers once that mystery is set aside. A passing, ordinary moment, a familiar feeling hallway, an oddly repetitive conversation, a room that seems to echo somewhere from the past, turns out to be a small, understandable byproduct of how attention, memory, and timing interact inside an otherwise ordinary brain. There is something worth sitting within that idea. The mind is constantly working in the background, absorbing more than it consciously processes, organizing experience into fragments rather than complete records, and occasionally tripping over its own timing. None of this makes the mind unreliable. If anything, it shows how much quiet, complex work goes into producing something as simple as the feeling of now. The next time that familiar, slightly disorienting sensation appears in a new place during an unremarkable conversation. In the middle of an ordinary day, there may be less reason to wonder if something unexplainable is happening, and more reason to appreciate just how much is happening quietly inside an ordinary mind. If this way of looking at human behavior, calm, evidence-based, and grounded in research rather than speculation, is something worth seeing more of, Leaving a thought in the comments about a personal experience with déjà vu would be genuinely interesting to read. And if there's an interest in continuing to explore the psychology behind everyday human experiences like this one, subscribing helps make that possible.